Hi, welcome to episode 419 of the Corner of Knit and Tea. My name is Laura. I'm also known as Full of Kara on Instagram and Twitter. I blog over at thecornerofknitandtea.com. That's where this episode and every episode's show notes will be. I have an Etsy shop where I sell my handspun yarns and my knitting patterns called The Corner of Knit and Tea. Hi, how are you? It is Monday, April 17th. And it is been a good day so far. Sorry, I don't know, I'm just a little off. It is kind of it is a spring day here in the Midwest. It is in the 60s. I am in a sweater because it's chilly in the house. It got cool overnight and we did not have the heat on. But it actually looks nice and warm outside and sunny, a little breezy, and I think I'm gonna go exercise outdoors after I finish recording here. It's late in the afternoon on Monday. I have worked and as I said, now I'm gonna record the podcast and then go out for a quick bit of exercise before dinner. So I hope that you are doing well. We had a really nice weekend. My husband and I really have not been doing a lot in the way of socializing pretty much since the pandemic. We just got out of the habit and haven't really gotten back in. And we actually had lunch with two separate friends, one on Friday and one on Saturday. And it was more socializing than we've done in a long time, but it was really, really nice. On Friday, we saw one of Wes's coworkers who also happened to be in our Dungeons & Dragons gaming group long ago. For those of you who have been with me for a while, it's been a long time since we played. We stopped probably a couple years before the pandemic. But we have all remained friends. We just haven't seen each other very much. And so we had lunch with him on Friday. And then on Saturday, we had lunch with another coworker of his who got married somewhat recently. I would say probably in the last year or so, and they are expecting. And I talk a little bit about that later on because, of course, I'm going to make something. But so that was nice. I think maybe I had met him, but I know I hadn't met her before. And Wes hasn't seen much of his coworkers because they all started working from home at the beginning of the pandemic and for the most part have not gone back. So occasionally they'll have a meeting at work or a teamwork event or, you know, like a, not networking, but like team building. But in general, they haven't seen each other. They don't see each other much anymore. So it was really nice. I realize that we are taking some risk by socializing and going out to eat. My husband and I are still masking pretty much everywhere, but when we go to restaurants, and often when we go to restaurants, we try and pick an off time to go so that there isn't a lot of traffic in the restaurant. So for instance, on Friday we went to lunch at 11 and on Saturday we went to lunch at 1:30 and so we missed the bulk of the lunch crews both those days. So you know, everyone has to make a decision on what works for them. We stayed home the rest of the weekend and didn't do very much, and we still mask when we go to the supermarket and the post office and the drugstore, and we do go out and shop for specific things we need, but we don't really do the same kind of window shopping that we once did. So that's kind of where we're at in our levels of pandemic, and we'll be staying home pretty much the rest of the week. So if by any chance we manage to catch something, we won't be sharing it. So I hope that you are doing well and that you had a good weekend and a crafty weekend. I had a fair weekend in terms of craft. I cannot decide precisely what's doing it, but I have been having a little bit of wrist pain just on one side in the last week or so, and I think it's a combination of a lot of different things. It seems to bother me most when I'm working on my brioche project, which it might be the brioche project, I'm not sure. I haven't had this happen before when I'm doing brioche, but this one's just a little bit different. It also bothers me sometimes when I'm typing on the keyboard and doing specific things on the, like using certain functions on the keyboard. So it's like the combination of keys and macros and whatever, like some convoluted way I'm keeping my hands on the keyboard. And then I think I've been sleeping on my arms. I'm mostly a side sleeper, but sometimes I wake up and I'm kind of like all cuddled up on one of my arms and it's a little bit numb. And so I think like the combination of all of those things has given me a sore wrist. So I didn't do a ton of knitting this weekend, mostly because I was trying to rest it up so that it wouldn't ache further. which is pretty much how I approach everything. That any soreness that I get while knitting or doing something else, I usually just try and cut back a little bit, as hard as it is. So I did knit a little bit on Saturday and Sunday, but I probably knit for 30 minutes here or 30 minutes there a couple times, rather than like some days on the weekends I'll start knitting at 2 or 3 in the afternoon and knit on and off kind of all through the evening. And I have worked up to that over the years. That's something I've been doing for a long time. So I wouldn't say try marathon knitting sessions right away, but I basically work up until I feel twinges anywhere, and then I stop and give everything a rest so that I don't hurt myself. So that's kind of my best advice. Listen to your body, stop, stretch, and if something hurts, don't do that for a little while. So I did not get quite as much done this weekend as I had hoped, which is actually kind of always the story, but I still have lots of things to show you. So let's get started. Today I am drinking creme brulee tea from T2. And this is tea that has black tea, vanilla, hazelnut, and something called hazelnut praline, which is made from sugar and hazelnuts. So I'm guessing a little bit candied. So this tea is a little bit sweet, and I guess creme brulee technically as a dessert is like caramelized sugar on top of custard, but this one tastes good, and I still actually have quite a bit left. I think I mentioned a while ago I found a box of tea that I brought home with me from work when I moved home from my office job 5 years ago, but almost all of it is in Ziploc bags, and so while it's not as fresh as it once was, it hasn't been opened in 4 or 5 years, so it's still tastes good, so I'm still drinking it. Tea, to me, tea doesn't really go bad. I know that they suggest that you use tea within the first few months of getting it, just because the ingredients are fresher, and of course the more you open the package and the more it gets oxygen in there, the more it is likely to just lessen flavor over time. I mean, I think of it like because tea is basically vegetation that has been dried, I think of it like dried herbs, which is they lose their potency over time. They're not bad for you. They haven't gone bad. They just don't have as much flavor. I generally drink my teas through to completion, no matter how long that takes me. And for a long time, I amassed a lot of tea. So I am still very much working on that. Although, I noticed I have a big basket full of like all my teas. And I've been working on that and kind of cleaning that out over time, and not replacing most of the things that I'm finishing. And so I think I'm pretty soon I'm going to be able to empty that entire work box into the basket, and then I won't have like a second box of tea hiding out. So actually that's great. And then as I start to finish teas, I'll decide what I want to replace, if I want to try new things, or I think I'd like to try and keep it a little bit more manageable in the future, mostly because I don't get through it that fast, and then some of it does degrade a little bit over time. Anyway, I would say in terms of teas, I mean, I'm certainly not an expert. If there's no obvious signs of problems, most everything if it has bits of dried fruit or things like that, I suppose over time you could notice something with that, but mostly it's been dehydrated, so there shouldn't be any problem with it. And unless you specifically notice some weird clumping or something that shouldn't be there, I think it's safe to drink tea pretty much forever. I don't know, I probably wouldn't drink stuff that was 100 years old, but we're talking 2, 3, 4, 5 years. I'm not having a problem with it. Anyway, so this is creme brulee. It's in my Friend of the Pod mug, which is a political podcast by Crooked Media. Depending on your beliefs, it may not be for you. But it was one of the things that I listened to quite a bit, particularly in the last 4 to 8 years. So that's delicious. I've had that before. It's black tea and a little sweet, and I don't know how much motivation it will give me to go outside and exercise, but it will carry me through the rest of the afternoon. So let's talk about the projects I have on the needles, and I will show you some other things, and we'll talk about what might be coming up, and then I'll get you out of here. So the first project that I am working on, and this is the one I think that might actually have done my wrist in, but I don't know for sure, is I am working on a very simple shawl. It's called the Sun Scrap Shawl, and it is by Jackie Verbeek, and it is a free pattern. Unfortunately, I think it is only available on Ravelry. However, I will give you enough information here in the podcast that you can basically create your own, because it is very, very, very simple. So the pattern is calls for fingering weight scraps and to be held in triple, so you're holding 3 strands together at once, and you are creating an asymmetrical triangular shawl that you get by increasing 1 stitch every other row. That's pretty much the pattern. You cast on 3 stitches, and then every other row increase a stitch. So you end up with an asymmetrical triangle. You can go as long as you wish, and you can change your colors as you wish. It's basically an asymmetrical triangular shawl meant to use up scraps. However, I am knitting this as a sample for Zen Yarn Garden, and I am using their new Superfine Glitter Base, which is 90% Superfine Superwash Merino, 10% Stellina, and has a little bit of you can definitely see some sparkle to it, but it's not overly gaudy. And it comes in a couple different put-ups. The first is in skeins, and I had to break into my second, or I had to wind my second skein last night so that I can break into it tonight. And this is a skein which is 400 yards, 100 grams, and this is in the natural colorway, and it is a little bit hard to see the sparkle in there, so if you don't see it, that's fine. And then the other thing that I'm using, and I'm holding this doubled, so I am actually holding only 2 strands rather than 3 strands, is I am using one of their Luxe cakes, which is basically a slightly larger put-up. It's 170 grams and 680 yards, and it they come in, the base comes in blanks, and then Zen Yarn Garden dyes them into really, really great colors. So as you may notice, I have knit quite a bit of this. The other end started in purple, went to red, and then went into orange, so I am more than halfway through, based on the fact that a skein is 400 yards, and this is where I'm at. So I just have a couple grams left of that very first skein, and these are 680, so I have about 280-ish left, and I will be breaking into my second skein to do that. I'm pretty sure I'm going to continue basically until I run out of the gradient, basically leaving enough for bind off. It'll be a little bit of a guess, but I'm gonna knit until I'm done with the gradient, and then I'm going to stop. It is more than the pattern calls for, but I would like to actually get through the entire gradient, even though it's going to create an enormous shawl that will be crazy warm and lovely to wear. So a few brief notes. Like I said, the pattern calls for holding 3 strands together to knit, and it calls for, I believe, a US 9 needle. Now I dropped 1 size, mostly because I do tend to drop a size when knitting anyway, but also because I was only using 2 strands, and I thought maybe since it was written for 3 strands at a size 9 that I might want to drop a little bit. So I went ahead and dropped down to an 8, and I believe what's happening is actually I'm basically almost knitting with a worsted weight, and I am working brioche, and I think it is just because it's thick enough, it is bothering my wrist a little bit because it's at a fairly tight tension. Normally with a worsted weight yarn, I'd probably be on a 9 or a 10, and I probably should have thought about that, but I was sort of trying to second guess how things were going. I should say the fabric that it's creating is nice. It will be drapey, but it's just that I think it's bothering my wrist a little bit, and actually it may also just be the brioche motion, because I notice on the straight knit rows, I'm fine. It's on the row where I'm going back and forth, where I'm slipping 1 yarn over and then knitting and slipping 1 yarn over and knitting, that my wrist feels like it's getting tweaked and it gets a little bit sore. So let me show you what I have so far, and then I'll give you the final clue to the pattern. Basically, since this is not available to everyone, I'll basically tell you what it becomes. So this is what I am knitting. As I said, it starts as an asymmetrical triangle with just a few stitches, and then, as I said, you are increasing 1 stitch on one side every other row, and so you are going into a triangle. And as you can see, I have gotten through more than the first half of the gradient, and of course we have a big chunk of purple here because the rows were very small, and as the rows get bigger, the sections of gradient get smaller, so of course the red section after this orange section will be much thinner, and then the purple section will be just a little bit at the end. I think it's coming across really nicely. You do, I think, lose a little bit of the gradient goodness when you marl it with the white, because it really tones it down quite a bit. But in person, I can still see some of the color gradation, and I think it's really nice. And you probably, maybe, can also see the sparkle. I can't tell if you can see the sparkle. It's the same base that I used for my last project, so you know there was sparkle in it. Hopefully you'll understand. Oh, maybe when I show you, You can probably see here. Yeah, you can see that there's some sparkle in it as I move it. It's not just the white in the background. There is some sparkle there. Anyway, so I hope to have this one finished by the end of the month, but as it's the 17th, I think I can take my time and kind of finish that because the rows are quite long. Oh, and then let me tell you the other thing about this. So I don't know what the official name for this is called. Oops. I found a mistake that I'm going to have to drop down and fix, which is fine. I will... Ooh, what did I do? I screwed up. I'm going to have to pull out a few rows. Okay, I will show you my screw-ups, and then I will have to drop back down and fix it. Okay, so the first thing that I noticed was right here, where I forgot to grab that loop, and that loop should actually be around back, so it's running in front, and I was going to drop down and fix that. I still will drop down and fix that. But then the other thing that I noticed is you can see right here, my columns don't line up anymore. I got off by one, so I need to pull those rows out and go back and fix them so that my columns stay as they are. So I'm calling this half brioche because you're only working brioche on one side of the pattern. Oh, and it looks like I really just screwed it up all the way across, didn't I? That was not so smart of me. So that will have to come out this evening, and I'll have to go back and fix that. That's a bummer. That's a total bummer. So as I said, half brioche. Don't look at my mistakes. Look at the part further down. Basically on one row, you are doing what would be sort of a standard brioche row, which is you are slipping one with yarn over and knitting, and then knitting the next one, and then slipping one with yarn over and then knitting. And then on the reverse row, you're just knitting all the way across. So it's only creating brioche on one side. So like I said, you can see here, don't look at the top rows because that's where I screwed up. You can see here at the bottom, you can see the columns of the knit stitches that travel up, and then in between you can see kind of where the brioche stitches are. And the difference between half brioche and full brioche is that it's not reversible. You don't get that same pattern on the back. So on the back, it just sort of looks like a stockinette back. So, or reverse stockinette or whatnot. I guess technically it's garter stitch, but who's counting? Basically, the back side doesn't look like the pretty side, and the front side looks like the pretty side. So, but the pattern is very much a recipe. Like I said, cast on 3 stitches, and then what she has you do is she has you slip the first and last stitch of every row. No. She has you slip the last stitch of every row, and then on the right side, you're knitting in the front and back. So basically increase 1 stitch every other row, do whatever stitch pattern you want, slip the last stitch of the row. Although that might be because of the brioche. You really can knit this pretty much any way you want. This is just one of many patterns made to use up scraps of yarn and kind of marling them together. And so, like I said, build yourself an asymmetrical triangle, knit till you run out of yarn or until it's big enough, and you've got yourself a shawl. So this one is not terribly complicated. I got through about half of it in maybe a little over a week. It was probably a little overzealous. I already did have to rip once, and I had to rip quite a bit, sadly. And I tried to put it all back on there one night, and I think actually that's when I hurt my wrist. So I'm just taking this easy and working on this, 3, 4, 5 rows at a time and putting it aside and coming back to it. And I will continue to do that until I finish. And I don't know if I'll be finished next weekend, but I will definitely be finished by the 30th because there's just not that much left to do. I'm more than halfway through at this point. So that is one of the projects that is currently on my needles. So the second project that I got into this week, because I had some surprise free time this weekend, is I started working on my sweater. Last week, I think I showed you, I can't remember whether I showed you, last week I know I talked about the sweater that I was going to cast on. It is the Weather Owl pattern, and it is by Kiyomi Burgeon, who, it was originally featured in Amarisu magazine, but you can also get it as a single pattern download, and I do have that linked. It's to Kiyomi's Payhip store. I was trying to think which kind of store it was. I know it's available on Ravelry, but it's also available off Ravelry, which is what I was trying to say is linked in my show notes. And it is a beautiful colorwork pattern. It is yoked, and then it has some details at the sleeves. Hers is actually knit in Lopi, and I am using a slightly different yarn. I'm getting a slightly different gauge, but I still think I'm going to be okay for what I'm getting. And last week I talked about how I didn't swatch. I was originally going to swatch the yoke motif but I decided not to do that because color work needs to be worked in the round, and I didn't want to have to work on a circular... Okay. When you're working color work in the round, your swatch should always be on the needle that you are going to be using to do the color work in the round. So for instance, if you're knitting a yoked sweater in the round, you are likely using a circular needle, in which case you should be swatching on that circular needle. However, you should always swatch the method that you're going to use when you're knitting the sweater. And when you are knitting a circular yoke in the round, you are always knitting because you are always on the right side rows. However, if you're using a circular needle and you're not actually creating a circular swatch, which you could do, if you're not actually creating a circular swatch, then what you need to do is you need to knit to the end of the row. You need to pull your yarn tail around, slide your stitches to the other end, and then continue. So you're only knitting on the right side. You don't want to actually purl back because your tension can change, and that's not going to give you the most accurate gauge swatch. I partially got a little lazy and partially wanted to make sure I had enough yarn. And one of the things you do when you knit that swatch is oftentimes people cut the loops on the back so that they can lay their swatch flat. If you twist a stitch at either end of your swatch, if you knit one through the back loop at the front end and the back end of your swatch, that will hold those in place enough so that it won't really unravel. Again, you're cutting your strips on the back, so you're cutting your horizontal strands, which means your piece should not unravel. However, once you cut those strands, they're very short strands of yarn, so they're not really good for much. Like I said, partially it was me being a little bit lazy and not wanting to swatch with those loops behind because I always find that really awkward. And partially it was I should have enough yardage, but I have not had enough yardage before. And the yarn that I'm using is a special yarn that I bought in Norway and may or may not be able to get more of. So I decided that instead what I was going to do is the sweater is knit bottom up and it asks you to start with the sleeves. And so I decided, and there is a little color work motif on the sleeves. So I decided what would be my best bet would be to just go ahead and start a sleeve. And yes, it's a little bit more than a swatch, but it's a round piece of fabric that I can practice my stitch tension on, and also a little bit of color work, and then I can wash it and block it and decide if I met the gauge that I wanted, if it creates the fabric that I wanted, and then I can either continue on from there or rip it out and start again. So I got not quite the gauge specified in the pattern, but a gauge that I am happy with and that will still give me plenty of ease within the pattern. The pattern Weatherell is designed to have between 6 and 10 inches of positive ease, and basically at the gauge I'm getting, I'm likely to have 4 to 6 inches of positive ease in my size, and I decided I did not need the 10 inches of ease, so I'm okay with it the way it is. Last week, I think it was still wet and blocking, which is, I think, why I didn't bring it to show you. But last week, I had basically knit up to a little bit beyond the color work. And so it has a cast on in your contrast color. I did my a couple inches of the knitting as it suggests, and then I did the cuff bit, and it is not like perfectly blocked. You can see just a little bit of where I caught my floats in there. I can see a couple of those as I'm showing you on the camera, but I think once I do a really good final block, it will be fine. I went ahead and dunked this whole thing in the sink and laid it out and did my measurement, got what is a reasonable facsimile to gauge. I'm supposed to be getting 19 stitches to 4 inches, and I got between 19 and a half and 20. My row gauge is a little bit off, and so I will take a look at that as I start going into the pattern, but basically I got what was close enough to gauge for me, and my sleeve is not quite as wide as it should be. These sleeves are not tapered, so the sleeve is basically just a very wide sleeve. So yes, this is a very, very wide sleeve. I don't know how best to, here. There we go. It is a very, very wide sleeve. I am aware of that. Some people have modified to make their sleeves ribbed at the bottom and bring them in. I actually decided to go ahead with the wide sleeves. The version that I saw a version of this pattern done on Instagram maybe about 4 or 5 months ago, and I absolutely fell in love with it, and her version is kind of oversized, and I do know that I don't want the body to be super, super oversized, but it looked like the perfect sweater to cozy up in on a winter's day, and while we are going into spring, so I'm not quite sure why I'm knitting that right now. I think just because I got excited about it. I am happy to make the pattern as written, although you could certainly do something different. So here's where I'm at so far. I am 1 skein in, and I just switched to a second skein. This yarn it reminds me of somewhat commercial yarn, and I do know that I have all the same dye lot because I double checked before I left the store. So I decided to just overlap. I think I did 3 to 5 rounds of overlap. I kind of started when I had just a little bit left and wound in a second color, and because I'm knitting in the round, I just kind of let it up the back. You can see just for the little bit, I guess it's a little more than that, but you can see for a little bit that you can see just a little bit where I kind of let it up the back, and I've got my ends inside, and now I'm continuing on with my second skein. So I will talk a little bit about the yarn that I am using, and then I'll move on. We'll discuss it more when I do more of it. So I am using, it's called Strickfeber. I'm sure I'm pronouncing it terribly wrong. And a lovely, sweet viewer told me that last week I said strick was for knitting and feber was probably fiber. She actually told me feber is fever. So it's knitting fever. And this is the name of the store, and then this is the name of, they have several of their own brands of yarn in there. In fact, I think most of their shop was mostly their own yarn. They were super big into mohair, and I really didn't want like a lot of their sweater. It was very funny because I walked in and they told me that this was this past August, and they told me that like the newest hottest thing was to hold 2 strands together, one of mohair and one of a DK weight, and then knit pullovers from that. And they showed me a whole bunch of sweaters that they had done by the Petite Knitter. I think it's the Petite Knitter. She's Dutch, and that is very much the style of her sweaters. And it made me laugh because I was like, oh yes, we totally have that trend in the US too. I'm well aware of it. It's not really my thing because I don't do that well with mohair. I find it a little bit itchy. And so I just bought a DK weight yarn. This is a single strand of a DK weight yarn, but I am getting approximately the gauge that I need to. The pattern, the original pattern called for Lopi, I think I said that, which is unspun Icelandic. I cannot wear that because that is a little bit too rough for me. I can't do it. And I think this one is going to give me an approximation. It's not going to fluff up quite as much, and it's certainly not going to felt together the same way, but I think it's okay. So I am using something called Remerino, which is 50% merino and then 50% recycled fiber. And I'm sure there is mohair in here because it is fuzzy. I don't know if you can see, but there's definitely, I don't know that you can see on the camera because I can't really see it, but there's definitely some fuzzies on here. I've held it up against my throat, and I think I'm going to be okay. I'm probably going to have to wear something underneath it, but I think I'm going to be okay. And the colors that I am using, I went and looked them up between last week and this week, and I am not going to try and mispronounce them, but this teal is called something like forest green button or something like that, and then this one is called glacier, and it's like a very cool mint. And I'll show you these two together. These are the colors of my sweater, and maybe you can see in the yarn, I think you can see in the yarn that there's definitely a little bit of a halo there. Sorry, here's the label. There's definitely a little bit of a halo there. And these skeins are 50 grams and 100 meters, so about 110 yards. It's really funny because I'm so used to working with many US weight skeins that don't come in 100-gram balls, or that don't come in 50-gram balls. They come in 100-gram balls, and so like 200, 225, 200, 225, 250, something like that when I'm working with worsted and DK weight. And it was really funny because I got to about here and was like, I'm running out of yarn. Why am I running out of yarn on my first cake? Because they're not that big. Anyway, I have 1,000 yards of the dark color, and I think I have 400 yards of the light color, which should totally be enough for this pattern. As I said, I didn't really want to sacrifice my swatch, so I just decided to do the sleeves. So this is the first sleeve. Now I just keep knitting up until it reaches the approximate inch where it's going to be joined to the sleeve. It's going to be joined to the body when I work on the yoke shaping. So I have this one to knit. I have a second one to knit, and then I have the body to knit. So I actually have quite a bit of fairly boring knitting to do before I get to the exciting part of the sweater. However, I think it's going to be fine, and the one thing I will say is that I worked on this for quite a long time last night. We had knit night last night, and I wasn't sure how long I was going to be able to keep knitting, but I knit for probably an hour and a half, almost 2 hours on this last night, which is where I got most of the length of this last night, and the straight knitting stitch actually wasn't bothering my wrist. So I think I will definitely use this as a break in between the other patterns so that I have something that's not soothing for my wrists, but something that's not causing them any problem. So I have two other small things to show you. Part of the reason that I had so much free time is because I'm between chickens. For those of you who have been watching for a while, I help knit feathers and other knit pieces that get arranged on sculptural chickens. I work for the City Girl Farm as a contractor. They are the home of the original chicken footstool, and these are kind of artistic sculptures. Technically, they can be used as a footstool, although I don't know that many people who use them for that. They are art sculptures, and they are made out of 100% wool. So there are a variety of things that happen. They have done some woven fabric pieces. They have done quite a bit of felting, and then I also spin and knit sometimes for them. And sometimes what happens is they don't get enough, mostly I knit for them, and sometimes what happens is they don't get enough yarn in time, and so I skip a week. So I was supposed to, usually I go up there late on Friday afternoons after work, and I drop off whatever I've been working on, and I pick up a new batch. And on Friday they were like, we don't have anything for you, so don't come. So I didn't come, which meant I didn't have a chicken to work on all weekend, which is how I worked on some of those things and basically took a break. What I have decided to do is on the weeks that I don't have a chicken, I'm actually working on my own chicken. So one of the perks of working with them as an artist and an independent contractor is that if you work with them for a certain amount, you can make a chicken of your own. Basically, they depending on what your part in the process is, they will give you the body and help you with the pieces. And so, for instance, since I'm a knitter and I wanted to do my own hand spun, I produced all of the yarn for the chicken and I'm working on knitting. And then when I get done, someone will help me pin it together, sew it together, and finish it off. And they will give me the body that goes kind of, the parts that go inside the chicken. So I think I have showed you some of this before, but I'm going to be working on this a little bit more this week, and I have a couple pieces that are done. I spun some yarn from Hello Yarn. What I did is I purchased a bag of mill ends of hers that were for enchilada night, which was something that well, maybe this wasn't even marked as enchilada night. I can't remember. It's a bag of mill ends. I know it was basically the prototype for enchilada night, and so it has all kinds of colors in it. It has like burgundies and navies, but then it also has some really soft pastels. And what I have done is I have spun it up into singles, and I am knitting it together with some yarn that I got a few years ago at Plyaway. Quite a few years ago at Plyaway. This is from the Ross Farm. It's from Shetland. And what I decided was, I ended up deciding that the wool had a little bit too much vegetable matter for me. Every time I was knitting it, I was getting covered in stuff, and I really wasn't liking that I was having to pick things out, and there were rough spots on where there was VM, and I didn't think I would like it as a sweater. Also, the natural color kind of tends to make me look washed out and dead. So I went ahead and decided to use it in this project. So it's going to be a very expensive chicken, but it's going to be my chicken and I'm going to cherish it. And what I wanted to show you is I think I started with this one just to kind of test the concept and see what I liked. So that is one. It hasn't been blocked yet, but that is one little set of chicken feathers. And then I moved on to a second set, and you can see some of the darker colors in here, the burgundies, the purples. You can also see some of those pastels, you know, some green, some pink, some purple. And then I also have this one. This one was also kind of pastels, although I have some of the green in there. So I've been working on those pieces, and generally what I do is I pull this project out when I don't have another chicken to be working on. So my hope is that I will add a few feathered pieces to that this week before I pick up another chicken, hopefully on Friday. And after a large amount of time, this is an ongoing project. I have no deadline on this. I will have enough to take them in and make my own chicken and bring it home. And then, of course, I will share it with you. I don't think, somebody asked me if it's going to be in the podcast like Norman is. I don't think it will fit up there. The chickens are actually really, really big. I might be able to put it beside me, but then I don't know if it would show in the camera. So I'm not really sure how I'm going to integrate that, but I might end up with a menagerie of things, and I might broadcast with my chicken next to me. But we'll see. So I am almost done here. I know actually I'm going on for quite a while today. I don't know precisely why, but hopefully that's okay with you. As I mentioned, on Friday, we went out to lunch, or Saturday, we went out to lunch with one of my husband's coworkers who got married in the last year, and they are expecting a little girl in September. And you know me, I love to knit. So, and I certainly love to knit baby things. So I decided that I would make a little something, and when I browsed through a bunch of patterns, I decided that I would make a baby vertebrae. I have knit a few of these before. They are kind of a sweet little raglan sweater. It's a top-down raglan. It's knit all in one piece, and it's kind of an open-fronted sweater. It fits very well on a newborn, basically to cover their arms and kind of their back, like around a onesie. And so often newborns have, you know, bibs on, or you're trying to keep them from spitting up all over themselves or whatever, and a little sweater for warmth is sort of exactly what they need. Combine that with the fact that this is going to be a September baby, so it's not going to be super, super cold, but I'm sure a little sweater would get good use. Now, the vertebrae pattern, and I cannot remember who the designer is, that will be in the show notes on my blog. There are two versions of, well, there are several versions of the pattern. There is a newborn vertebrae, which is sized for newborn, and it is a free pattern on Ravelry. Then there is the baby vertebrae, which is written for several sizes and also several weights of yarn. And so I am actually using the paid pattern for this one because what I decided to do is not knit a newborn. I decided to knit a 0 to 3 months so that they'll be able to get a little use out of it. My only concern sometimes with newborn patterns is if my gauge is a little off and I come out a little small and the baby ends up a little big, they may or may not get to wear it at all. And even if they do, they may only get to wear it for a couple weeks. So my thought is that I would do a 0 to 3 months. That would cover me September through like November, and by then it's going to be getting cold and they'll want something a little warmer, so that is totally fine with me. So the pattern also comes in a couple different weights. So the paid pattern comes in a variety of sizes, I think 3, 4, 5 sizes, maybe 6 sizes, I can't remember exactly how many, and then it is also written based on different gauges. So if you want to use fingering weight, sport weight, DK weight, worsted weight, those are all in the pattern. It is a really good deal. I mean, you can certainly go with the newborn one if you want to and you want to use it for free, but the baby one is great. And then actually, I think there is a pattern Mama Vertebrae, which has, you can knit the same pattern for yourself. And if I were knitting it for myself, I'd probably knit it slightly larger gauge because I'd want it to be a little warmer. But for a baby, I really, really like the fingering weight gauge because it's just a really nice weight sweater to just put on over a onesie. Babies can run hot or cold. It kind of depends. My niece always ran really hot, and so my sister would like cover her up to keep her warm, and then she would get really red in the face and she'd cry, and you'd start taking clothes off, and the more clothes you took off, the happier she got. So so it kind of just depends on your baby, and I think that a fingering weight sweater is super useful. So all of that is to say that I went in and went through my stash and found a skein. And this is a really pretty skein of purple. It's also got speckles of a few other things. It's got a little bit of gold in there, and then I think a little bit of navy, and maybe even a little bit of pink too. It's very semi-solid, so it's not going to come across as a very gift, but it's going to be really, I think it's going to be really, really nice. And this is a skein of sock yarn that I got from Hello Yarn. Every so often, she decides to dye some sock yarn, and this is superwash blue-faced Leicester wool, 100 grams, 438 yards, in the colorway Rattle. And I'm sure Rattle meant something else, but of course it's the perfect baby color. So I think this will be really sweet and not like too girly. I like that it's a little bit darker. It's not like a super baby lavender. And the little splotches of navy and pink and gold in there, I think will make it really, really nice. So that will probably get on my needles sometime this week if I have a little bit of time, and I'll be working on that. Again, I don't have a deadline till September, but I just wanted to knit something baby, and I also realized that probably knitting something like this in fingering weight is not going to be terribly hard on my hands because that one is, well, it's knit back and forth, so they're stockinette and purl, but it's not going to be the brioche situation where my wrist is flipping back and forth. So that's what I've got there. So quick sip of tea, I'll show you the spinning, and then we'll be done. So I do have a finished skein to show you. It is not 100% finished in the sense that it is still quite damp. I washed it last night, and it's not ready to be measured and go into the shop yet, because it needs to dry fully so I can get an accurate weight measurement, and also so I can get an accurate length measurement so I can tell you exactly how much yardage it is. This was the City Lights braid that I got from Kim Dye's Yarn, and I honestly didn't really know exactly how it was going to spin up. I showed you last week it was looking very, very pastel. The braid itself was gray and white, and then it had splotches of other colors on it, like pink and purple and yellow, and it was called City Rainbow, so it was kind of like a gray with a little bit of rainbow colors on it, kind of like maybe a cloudy sky and a rainbow. It kind of was a little bit surprising when I finished it. So this is what I ended up with. It turned out that there was enough yellow in it that bright yellow kind of is kind of dominant in the skein. So you can see there's a lot of bright yellow in there, and then you can also see the pink in there. Now there are other colors. You can definitely see that there's blue and gray and white, but it overall came out with kind of a yellow cast that I wasn't quite expecting from the skein, but it's really pretty. I think this would actually make a really lovely baby something. This is Blue Face Leicester and silk, so it is not superwash, so maybe not baby, but I do think it would make a really lovely baby something if you have someone who understands wool and is okay taking care of it, hand washing it. It is just really, really lovely. I think it would make nice socks. Of course, they wouldn't be superwash, so they could felt a little bit, but I think it would make really nice socks. BFL is a nice, smooth, long, stable, medium stapled fiber, and the silk gives it kind of extra strength and not so much shine here, but does give it some extra strength here. And it's just really a soft color palette. It's very springy to me. A little bit less, it's interesting. In the skein, it looked kind of like overcast and a little bit of a rainbow, and now it just looks kind of springy, yellowy and green. That's just kind of the main color that I get from this skein. So I will be finishing letting this dry. I'm gonna uncoil it or unskein it and let it dry a little bit more, and then I will measure it and put it up in the shop probably tomorrow. Today is Monday, shop probably Tuesday, providing it's dry, otherwise Wednesday, and I will probably be 375 to 400 yards based on what I had before. I need it to finish drying so that I can determine its final length, because when you wash fiber that you have spun, oftentimes it shrinks a little bit. And so I always need to let it dry before I can figure out exactly what the weight and yardage is. Yeah, so I will do that this week. So I actually have started on the next braid, and I did show this to you a while ago. I showed it to you last week. It's not a while ago. Sorry, my brain is very, very off. This is a purple braid from Kumasi fiber. It's Kumasi on Etsy, and there will be a link in the show notes. And this is kind of a purple fiber. She does not name her fibers. She just spins them and puts them up in her shop. So this is a variety of purples. You've got kind of plummy burgundies. You've also got kind of violet and and then some kind of royal purple. They're just really, and there is some white. And what I have done is I divided the braid in half, and then I am spinning kind of some strips. There's actually, I think there was some navy or some really, really dark purple, almost black purple, on the other half of, I think it's just black purple, on the other half of the braid. So I haven't decided whether I'm going to spin this half straight through or whether I'm going to divide it into strips. The first half I divided into 4 strips, so I might do this one in 2, which will be a little bit of a fractal spin. I think it's just going to give it an overall kind of purple look and give you a little bit of kind of semi-solid variation in it. And this is Corriedale, which I absolutely love for socks. It is not superwash, but I find Corriedale is kind of, it is a little bit of a more medium stapled wool. It is not as soft as some of your wools, but it's also not as rough as some of your more rustic outer wearing wools. And I really like Corriedale in between for socks because while I love soft and cushy merino socks, they just don't wear as well because they're very, very soft. And Corriedale is just a little bit, it's not hard enough to be rough on my skin, but it is a little bit more durable, so I find that my socks pill a little bit less, and I have a little bit less trouble with felting when I use a slightly more sturdy fiber. And of course, my socks felt because my feet's wet. I know it's not very exciting, but I just want to tell you that. If you have feet that sweat, you might felt your sock bottoms a little bit. I don't know if it bothers you. It doesn't bother me because those are in my shoes. Anyway, so I am spinning this on Corriedale. This would make a great sock yarn, and it will be up in my shop, but I'll probably finish it this week and be able to show it to you next week. So the last thing that I want to talk about is, and it's not really, well, so it's a little bit neither here nor there. Spinning. Ply-Away is coming to Kansas City this week, and Ply-Away is a spinning convention put on by Ply Magazine and J.C. Boggs Faulkner. J.C. Boggs Faulkner? It's J.C. Boggs, and I think her third last name is Faulkner, or second last name. Really having trouble here. I am not taking classes this year because I knew I was starting a new job, and so I didn't want to take too much time off of work. I was a little concerned that they would not want me taking time off work in my first month and a half. And I also, the class that I really wanted to get into was sold out by the time I got there, so I kind of just decided the combination of both meant that I wasn't going to take a class this year. But I am going to go to the market this weekend. So, and I have 2 or 3 things on my list. I will say that the way I approach markets now is a little bit different than I have in the past. I actually have things on my list that I am looking for, and so I hope to come home with those, and I will probably share those with you. I don't do a lot of shopping and stashing trips with you, but I do think it's kind of fun when I go to an event to show you some of the makers that I saw there that you might not see elsewhere, or there are so many small makers these days and it's impossible to see all of them, but if I pick up something interesting, then I will bring it back and share it with you. So I hope you have a lovely week ahead. I hope you are enjoying crafting. I hope the weather is cooperating where you are, and I hope that you are healthy. Until I see you next time, I will say, as I always do, happy sipping, happy knitting, happy spinning, happy sipping, and I'll see you next time. Bye.